Yeah, yeah, that we need to balance it out with positivity. So that's what we're
Hmm.
doing right here.
Hmm. I actually listened to that one day and I went out and did something positive because it was one of those overwhelming days, which come
Good
more
for you,
often than
Dave.
not.
Yeah. And it doesn't take much, It's like just having a good time somewhere, going whatever, it's that positive energy, no matter how it generates. So it doesn't have to be like a earth-shattering positivity.
It's
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
I hear you.
It is powerful, but it's harder and harder to do the more anxious you feel. You
I completely agree.
just afraid to let go. Look, if I turn off my alert button for 1 minute, there might be a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Um,
And then what? We need to find a safe place. I mean, can you imagine living in the Middle East now, in like Israel or UAE, anywhere in the Gulf
mm-mm,
states?
mm-mm.
Like I don't think our brains can actually process
Process
that.
that. No, you're
Mm-mm.
right. You're
And
right.
it does, anyway, and I know we want to get started, but you're right, Donna. It's like
Yeah.
this whole, and Kate, like this whole, remembering when we were kids, like,
Hmm.
all that
Stephanie, we should
stuff.
actually write a little bit about that. We should be in this moment and not ignoring it, because people are really scared.
People are
People are
scared.
scared.
And really
Yeah.
a lot of the whole I mean, we'll talk about it, but dignity, I
Yeah.
think also what we're trying to do with the Meraki Dignity Project is, you know, sort of recognize that people are at these places where they don't know what the first next step is. And it's just
Yeah.
scary. I mean, this is on another level, but it is
It is
scary.
scary.
Actually, it does get to one of our questions, I think, at the end, which is about a dignity practice. And maybe
Yeah.
we can talk about that in the context of this moment,
Yeah.
Mm.
managing our day to day.
Because that's even day to day. I mean, it's one thing to have a conversation with somebody you disagree with, but just in your day to day life, if you're filled with anxiety about what's going to come on your phone or in your news feed or whatever,
Yeah.
that's like we've never had this before.
No.
No, we haven't.
So,
And we know
yeah.
that Iran is incredibly capable, and if they want to get to our shores, they will.
Oh, yeah. They probably already hear Kate.
Oh, I'm sure they're already here. I'm sure
Mm.
we saw that in San Francisco potentially. I'm sure they're
Yeah.
already here.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, okay. I actually turned on the record button. We because I didn't
We'll
want to
edit
forget
that out.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to forget because we were in such a good conversation. What I thought we would do is, and that's part of the whole menopause loving, that your memory just kind of goes in and out. Let's just
Yep.
get real here. So I was going to just introduce you really briefly, Donna, because it's like you are so, there's no way that I can give it justice, but I'll do that really quickly. And I'll probably ask the first question, really just asking, dignity is a big concept. How do you explain it? If that feels comfortable place to
Sure,
start.
sure. And the other, I think you already have asked this question, but anyway, I typically start out by explaining how I got to this word, how did
Mm.
this happen and where did that come from? And then do the what it is and what it isn't kind of
Well,
just
let's start there. Why don't you ask that, Kate? Because I think is that okay? Do you want to start with that one and launch in?
Sure.
Okay.
So, I am really interested, Donna. I know a little bit about how you got to where you are and why you're doing what you're doing from an academic perspective, but from a personal perspective, I think maybe there's a story there, and we would
yeah.
like to hear
Yes, I know that story a little bit, but that would be great if you'd be willing to share.
Yeah,
So
the personal part, I don't typically share the personal part, and certainly not in the very beginning, but boy, I am open to anything right now, anything that might be helpful to people.
okay. Okay.
Because we need help, God only knows. We need some intervention from something bigger than us. I don't know what it is, whatever you want to call it. No, but I grew up in a family that was uh, a mixed ethnicity family, let's put it that way. My father was from a Yankee family here, what came here on the Mayflower, and they were long list of theologians and philosophers, educators. And by the way, my great 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 grandfather was the founder, one of the founders of the Universalist Church, Unitarian Church here in the
Mm,
U.S. So
wow.
you might not have known that one.
I did not.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm always learning. That's
So I
good.
feel like I'm channeling a lot of stuff from these
Mm,
ancestors. But the other thing is that my mother, on the other hand, she was a Polish immigrant, and none of her family spoke English. They came to this country and bought a farm, and did all kinds of farming. They had 16 children.
mm.
Yes, I 1 6, you heard that right. They had 16 children.
Oh,
And my mother was the only of the 16 only child who went to school and got an education. And she met my father in school because they grew up in a very small town. And so they fell in love in high school and then, got married immediately. But that was where the joy ended, basically,
Oh.
because they ended up getting along like oil and water. My father's family was so proper, you know, and my mother's family is like they just had to get the cows in to milk them. They were concerned about really
practical.
practical things. So anyway, long story short, it was like awful growing up in that. There was conflict everywhere, and especially conflict when there were two ethnicities, two cultures, let's put it that way,
Mm,
cultures
mm,
clashing. And I thought, even as a little kid, I remember like 5 years old thinking, there's something wrong here. It's not supposed to be this way. We can do better than this. So honestly, I feel like this concept of dignity and how we treat each other and what that looks like in relationships, how we resolve conflict, how can we have conflict in a healthy way, not in a dysfunctional way. That started really as soon as I could process, even before. So I think this has been following me around all my life. And I don't think it's a surprise that I studied international conflict resolution as a graduate student. My PhD is actually in human development, but I apply it to conflict. What does it mean when we're in conflict, and how does that help or hinder our development as human beings?
mm.
That question actually turned out to be quite handy when I started doing this dignity work. But anyway, that was Kate. That was the origin of how I got interested in dignity and how we as human beings treat each other and what good relationships are supposed to look like, and how, I ended up studying the most intractable international conflicts
Yeah.
at Harvard with my mentor, Professor Herbert Kellman. And, we were just the only people at the time that were doing the social psychological dimensions of these international conflicts. Yes, we were looking at the political issues that divided the parties, but mostly, we were searching for how to address the human injuries that take place when these intractable conflicts go on for years and years and years. We studied the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was my mentor's focus because he was a Holocaust survivor and he really wanted to dedicate his life to trying to find a solution there. So.
That, Kate, that is, I'm really glad you asked that question.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate, and I love the fact that you brought in the connection to the human part, because I think in, a lot of what we've been talking about in these conversations, Donna, has been humanity and human in the loop. I mean, whether it relates to AI, whether it relates to technology, whether it relates to conflict, whether it relates to kind of how we're, the divisiveness. So I think that idea of bringing or having that human element, even from your childhood, right? Sort of this, does this even make sense as humans to be kind of in conflict? Um, well, I'm going to start with introducing you. I mean, we could always, maybe we'll end up introducing you in the middle and then we can get going. And I don't know, Kate, you can maybe come in with the first question. How's that? Or maybe it's the
That
second
that
question.
that
That
wasn't the
was the
first
first one.
question.
I think we're going to make it the second. So now we'll come back to, I think we couldn't help ourselves but start. So I'm really honored, honestly, to be here. And over the past couple of years, I guess it's been 2 years now, Donna, I've had the privilege of getting to know Donna Hicks. And what I've really come to appreciate, which I think you may have just gotten a taste of, is her quiet strength, just this kindness, generosity, the time she's giving to be here to talk with us in a very busy schedule at a very crazy time in the world. And the way I think, Donna, you truly live what you teach. To many who we've come across, and to many of you, she is the world's leading voice on dignity. To me, she's the queen of dignity. She's helped me, and so many of us help us see that dignity is not an abstraction. It's something we all carry, and something that can change how we show up in our lives. So I'm really grateful to be here in conversation with her, and of course, with my co-conspirator at the Meraki Dignity Project, Kate Lilienthal. So let's launch back in. Kate, you want to start or
Okay.
continue?
Yes. My lights were going off, Donna, when you talked about human injury. And what I had wanted to ask you is how you define dignity. But maybe the better question there is how you, if this is the right way to ask it, how you can work with human injury and dignity. How does dignity provide a lens for healing?
Yeah. Well, for me, that's one of the central questions, Kate, because it's one thing to have identified this deeper human issue that is at play in all of these conflicts I worked on over the years, for my 25 years working on these intractable conflicts. One of the reasons why I felt so compelled, especially as a person interested in human development, I was always interested in what takes us to the next level of consciousness. Well, what I realized was that by identifying for those parties in conflict that I worked with all over the world, by identifying their inner human reactions to what was going on in their conflicts, identifying it as a dignity violation, rather than saying, "Oh, you're just traumatized. You are so emotional. You have to stop being so emotional." Those words were non-starters. If I said to them, "Oh, that's such an emotional response you just had," they shut down. Or if I said, "Oh, that was a traumatic response. Oh, you had so much trauma." No, all of that felt to them like weakness. And they didn't want to communicate that they were weak about anything to the other side. So
Mhm.
this word, when I brought up the word dignity, I mean, believe me, it took me a long time to figure out what the word was. And I swear, it hit me like an epiphany one day. And I said, what they really want to be talking about is they want to say to each other, "How dare you treat us this way? How dare you? We're human beings. You can't treat us this way." And once I got that word dignity popped into my head. And when I mentioned to the one of the parties, I was actually in Colombia, South America, for this intervention I was doing. When I brought up the word dignity and I said, "Look, I can see I've been working on these intractable conflicts all my career, and I can see here at the table that you are experiencing a lot of deep human reactions to this conflict." I said, I really would like to spend our time together talking about how your dignity has been assaulted here and what the role that's playing in your inability to solve this issue that you're grappling with together. And it was for the very first time when I introduced this idea to these. I mean, there were military people there were people from the Defense Department, and they were in a terrible conflict, awful. I mean, the security of the country was actually at stake because they couldn't get along, these two groups in the government. And so when I mentioned the word dignity, and I said, I would really like to focus our attention for these 2 days on the role dignity is playing here and how what it's like for you to have your dignity so assaulted and so,
Mm,
you know, trampled on. And I have a feeling that's going to be a better starting point for us than any communication skills or mediation, whatever. And I said, with your permission, I'd like to spend our 2 days talking about dignity. And I said, could I have a show of hands, please? And lo and behold, it was like silent for about 30 seconds. And I thought, oh no, I screwed up again. And and then all of a sudden the hands started popping up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, everybody said, yeah, we can talk about our dignity. This is exactly what's happening here. And they said it's not just our dignity here between dignity violations that we've experienced, but we have had our ancestors have had all these dignity violations too that we've inherited here. And so it was so interesting when I finished at the 2 days, and I wish I had time to tell you the whole story about what we did. And but the healing element of this, Kate, was that they, for the first time, felt that someone asked them a question about what was really going on inside them, about these
mm.
wounds to their sense of worth, to their sense of value. Like, how could you treat us this way, me this way, if you think I'm worthy? So you must think I'm not worthy. And they had these deep, deep conversations about their stories. And it was not about anything abstract. It was about their personal story about what happened to them in this conflict between the two groups. And by the end, I mean, I did this for 2 days with them. And by the end, they were reconciled, because the other healing part of this process, I can say this with great confidence, is that when people feel acknowledged for the suffering they've endured, that's when the healing process starts. Because, they had never told their stories before, certainly not to each other. And to be able to say, look, I was mistreated. I was mistreated at and then I'll tell you, I think you're going to ask me about what dignity is in a minute, but my research has shown that these dignity violations are just as serious as physical injuries and that they show up in the brain in the same area as a physical wound. So once they heard that, they felt legitimized. They felt, yes, this is exactly what's going on here. And I felt it. I felt it so many times. And when they got the acknowledgement from the other side, that, when they would say, yeah, I understand what we did here. We really injured each other. And they found that isn't that ironic, but they found that common shared experience of having experienced a dignity violation as a way to let go of the pain and suffering because they both agreed this was what's happening. So it was really quite something. It was really quite moving for me because it was, evidence that I was on the right track, especially because I'm a psychologist, and I
Mm.
want to know what name those injuries and name what it took to actually begin a healing process.
Wow.
Out of curiosity, this healing process, when you're basically working on a person's sense of dignity, their sense of self-worth, is it days, weeks, years? Does it depend on the person? Does it depend on the
Yeah,
severity of the injury? I'm
I would
sure.
say all of the above, Kate.
Hmm.
I would say all of the above. And one of the things that I emphasize when I work with people with this jump start to healing with the acknowledgement, well, I mean, Tutu taught me this. He said, Archbishop Desmond Tutu taught me this. He said, Donna, when people have experienced dignity violations, they need acknowledgement for the suffering they've endured. All of us need that. They said, we need acknowledgement for the suffering they've endured. And and sometimes sometimes it doesn't take more than one person to say, "Oh my gosh, that happened to you? That's terrible. That should never have happened." Sometimes it only takes that. And to be seen, so, and to be heard and to be recognized, so immediately, like, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't have had to go through that. That was wrong. That was absolutely wrong what happened to you." So and sometimes if you have like a lot of intergenerational trauma, and well, trauma, listen to me, dignity violations that people experience, that
Hmm.
actually they get passed down like a dominant gene, these intergenerational experiences of dignity. And if you don't have them healed, if you don't get a good jumpstart process, then they're going to linger on with some people. But I always say to my participants that what we have to do, all of us have experienced these dignity wounds. I don't know any human being who hasn't. I said, and we need to have it acknowledged, just like we're doing right now. Uh, and at the same time, we need to have people around us, surrounding us, who know what we've been through, who can help us when we're feeling that tenderness of and fragility that the dignity wounds create. And we can call up, like Kate, you can call up Stephanie and say, "Hey, I'm your dignity buddy here. I know you're suffering, Stephanie, and I can tell. I know you really well. Please, let's sit down, have a cup of coffee, and let's talk about it." So we can do that for each other. And of course, it goes without saying, getting good therapy is also important, but we can't go to a therapist 24 hours a day.
Hmm.
Sometimes we need somebody right in the moment and we can't get to our therapist. So there's all sorts of ways to to get deeper help, and there's nothing more powerful than to have a good trusted person say to you, "I'm here to help you. What is it you need? I'm really committed to helping you." Because you're helping each other. It's not just one-way street either. This is a reciprocal relationship.
Do you, do,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Kate. Go
Stephanie,
ahead.
go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Uh, uh,
I'll
do, uh, and again, this is not where we meant to take these questions, but I can't help myself. Do you think that women experience dignity any differently from men?
I think they're more willing to talk about it. I think they're more willing to express to just be open about what is going on. And of course, that's not a generalization. There's some women that
Mhm.
are just totally shut down and can't do this. And at the same time, I when I started with this dignity work, I have to admit my bias. I thought, maybe this is work that women could do more, um, willingly than
Hmm.
men. And boy, did I get that wrong. I
Mm.
really got that wrong because one of the things that happened after I wrote my first book, Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, one of the things that happened when it got published, I thought it was going to be for my international conflict resolution colleagues. But I got calls from the corporate world, from healthcare, from education, faith communities, you name it. And they all said, "I think you've nailed our problem." So when I went into the corporate world for the first time, and because I did, it was, so clear to them that dignity was at the heart of their toxic work culture. Um, the people that I worked with at the executive leadership team, I think there was one woman and 12 men. And I thought, whoa, this is going to be a little hard opening this up. But it wasn't. It wasn't
Mm.
hard. There was this sense that I had identified something that they had all experienced, and even that they may all have perpetrated dignity violations on their direct reports and the people who were, because this was the leadership team. And I was just I was just really surprised that, I mean, this is after a lot of introduction too, because in the very beginning they thought, "Oh, this is just touchy-feely stuff. This is so nice, this dignity." And then I went through the whole thing and I went through the neuroscience of it and all the rest. And they really, really embraced it. So, and I've been working with the corporate world quite a bit, and it still continues. I think there isn't the societal um, permission that men don't feel that permission to be
Mm,
open and intimate as quickly as women. Maybe. I mean, I'm just saying maybe, but
mhm.
it really does depend too, and how safe they feel. Safety is everything when it comes to talking about your dignity violations. And I think women with women feel safe with each other. Women with men with other women, like, well, I got through, I got through to their pain. And they were grateful. They were really, really grateful.
I know you've sort of been circling around this. Kate, I'll just interject here for a
Yeah.
minute, and I know we have a ton more questions and we don't have a ton of time, but I know you've
Okay.
used the words worth and value, and I loved your point as well. I had not sort of thought about this, about the communal aspect of dignity and kind of how not only is it something that you have, but the shared acknowledgement is part of the healing. I want to just maybe ask you, like, if you, when you sort, what really, if you were to just define dignity in a really simple or clear way, sort of in the hierarchy of things, because these words all resonate, worth, value, shared experience, but it still feels sometimes ethereal. So how do you make it concrete in your mind and as you talk about it to others? I love the neuroscience, but just more generally, Donna.
This felt like my first challenge to answer this question. I mean, my first challenge when I was writing about, well, and creating what I call the dignity model now. Um, my goal at that in those early stages of my development of this model, my goal was to try to reduce human suffering because I saw
Mm,
it everywhere and all these conflicts, both sides. I saw it in families. I saw it. Once I figured it out that this is what was going on, I realized that I had to make that definition so simple that even kids could understand it. Because my goal was to teach this in schools to
Mm.
teachers, and that I fulfilled that goal, by the way. I'm so happy to report. But so the simplicity was really important to me because it's such a deeply emotional issue. You don't get much deeper than people's sense of their worth, you can't get in that soul
Mm.
space without, touching people's sense of, am I worthy? Am I, do I deserve to be treated with love and attention? All of that.
Mm.
So I went through all the philosophers, all the theologians. I mean, it took me 7 years to write that first book because I wanted practical answers to that question. I wanted to figure out how can I explain this to people so they'll all say, yeah, that's it. That's it. And what I ended up doing was talking about um, our inherent, inborn value and worth. That dignity isn't something that you have to work for. Dignity is already inside you. You were born with value and worth. And so the definition I came up with was that dignity is our inborn, inherent value and worth, and our inborn vulnerability to having it injured. So, in other words, just because we have dignity doesn't mean that that's okay, that's great, I've got it, and I'm going to use it. No, it's a very reactive thing, our dignity. And when somebody doesn't treat us right, it gets all riled up. We get so upset. We feel, we get, a lot of self-doubt comes into the picture too. Oh, maybe if they treat me badly, I am bad. So the simple definition is our inherent value and vulnerability. And let me say, this is probably even the more fundamental part. It's different from respect.
Ah, that's good. That was going
oh,
to be my question. Because it's often almost defined as respect, or respect is defined as dignity. And
Yeah,
you preempted sort of my follow on, so go for it.
yeah. So it's dignity and respect. If you hear, I mean, next time you look at somebody who talks about dignity, it's always dignity and respect as if it were one word. So, and this I also learned from Desmond Tutu. He said, "Look, you are born with dignity, and you don't have to do anything. I mean, yes, you can feel good about yourself if you get that new job, or if you get the pay raise, or if you're, whatever that external." Sense that makes you feel good about yourself, whatever that is, that's great, but it's only frosting on the cake. The cake you're born with. It is your inherent worth as a human being. And not only is it just yours, but every human being on this planet has the same inherent value and worth. And so he said, but respect, on the other hand, has to be earned. You're not going to get people to just turn, turn away from a bad relationship and say, "Oh, I respect you." No, you can't do that. It doesn't work. But can we resolve our conflict in a way that preserves our both of our inherent value and worth? And that's the answer to my question. Yes, we can. And that's what drove me to create the dignity model. Yes, we have these injuries that we are so good at perpetrating on each other. In fact, I think we're way better at violating each other's dignity than we are at honoring it. Because, what I mean, I've gone all over the world teaching this stuff and to little ones too. And this isn't any, we don't see this anywhere. We don't get a deep dive into dignity in K through 12, or we don't get it even in higher education. Maybe in theology school, people are maybe there, but even so, the ignorance surrounding this basic concept that we are all born with dignity. But here's the key. Here's the key. We're all born with dignity, but we're not born knowing how to act like it, or we're not born knowing how to treat each other this way.
Hmm.
This is our job here. This is Stephanie and Kate. This is our job, is to help people understand the basic building blocks of what it means to live a life of dignity, both inside ourselves, because there's an internal process that you have to go through in accepting your own dignity. And then there's the external process where you're treating other people with dignity. So it's a two-way, that's why I said it's a two-way street. And the universality of this for human beings is another aspect of it that has opened doors for me everywhere in the world because, you know, in my field, we say, oh, if we're going to resolve conflicts, we have to find common ground. And I say, I don't believe that anymore. We have to find higher ground.
Oh, I
We
love
have to find higher ground, and dignity takes us there. If we accept that all of us human beings, share this one thing, we might not share life experiences or cultures or whatever, or race or religion, but we all share the desire to be treated with dignity, the dignity that is inherent in each and every one of us. So, we've got this shared humanity that can give us an opportunity to look at each other as if, oh, we're a part of the same human family. We all want this. This is what we want. This is what can bring us together. And, like no time like the president to present, oh, not the present, no time like the present to recognize this basic fundamental human truth as shared humanity, that we all have it. And that's where we can go to that higher ground
it.
to get to that highest common denominator that we all experience. We all want this. And yeah, so
I love the
we're
higher
working at
ground.
it.
I
Higher
think
ground.
Hmm.
that is a awesome way to think about it because I think it sort of puts the onus on us to really aspire to it and do something and be active in our dignity practice or however we think about
Yeah.
dignity as opposed to common ground, which feels sort of complacent in some way.
Well, I always say, Stephanie, that our common ground is a mess. It's a mess out here, you know. We've got to
And
elevate
more.
ourselves. We can do better than this. We are better but you know, this is a question of evolving our consciousness. Remember, I told you in the beginning, that's what I was studied when I was in graduate school. What does it take to get us out of that stuck place in our development to reach higher consciousness, to be more aware of the impact of our actions on other people, to be more aware of what we share instead of all these all horrible differences that, you know, people pull out of here, there, and everywhere. So, yeah.
Well, Donna, that actually does lead to the next question. What is a dignity practice? How, what is that
Yeah.
for you? And is it vary by culture or
I thought it might be, you know, Kate, I thought, well, but first of all, what I realized after defining dignity and, you know, the neuroscience of dignity is another step in this development of this model, before I get to answer your question, Kate, because the neuroscience tells us that our brain doesn't know the difference between a wound to our dignity and a physical injury. So the pain and the impact
Mm,
of that violation is just felt in our brains and in our whole bodies, our whole system. All that cortisol that runs through when somebody humiliates us or treats us as
mhm,
less than. And well, it's the same as getting a physical injury. We that pain center of our brain in the area called the limbic system, and the amygdala in particular, is where we process all of the ancient emotions, you know, the love and fear and hate and all of these deep human emotions. So then what I realized after because I have to communicate that. That was when I worked in the corporate world for the first time, that was the thing that turned them around, you know, that turned the executive leadership team around that, oh my gosh, are you kidding? The brain doesn't know the difference between a wound to its dignity. And yeah, and I said, well, think about the last time you had a dignity injury. And they would say, yeah, it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. So
Mhm.
mhm,
anyway, but then I realized what I had to do was I make this really practical so that people would understand clearly what it means to have their dignity violated, or understand clearly what it means to violate somebody's dignity. So I went around the world interviewing people and asking them to tell me about a time when they felt their dignity was honored and a time when they felt their dignity was violated. And this concept of dignity, you know, like you were asking, Kay, I expected we were going to find cultural differences. I was expecting that we might even find sex differences, men and women feeling differently about this. But much to my surprise, what I ended up discovering in this research, you know, the key is get people talking about their experience of being violated or honored. That's
mm,
the key right there. But what I found was that there were these 10 common patterns that emerged no matter where I was. Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Middle East, no matter where I was, they would have the same emotional reaction to the stories they told. So, for example, I came up with these 10, I call them now 10 elements of dignity, 10 ways that people can experience a violation or an honoring. People want their identity accepted, no matter who they are, no matter their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. People want to be seen as equal in dignity, even if status was different. In fact, I think people with a lot of power have more responsibility to be sure that people who are suffering
mm,
below them, you know, are treated with dignity. And there's recognition. People want to be recognized for their unique qualities. They want to be recognized in the workplace for doing a good job. They want to feel safe. And it's not just physical safety, it's also psychological safety. They want to be treated fairly. They want to be understood. They want to be given the benefit of the doubt. I mean, people can take a look at these. These are online. People can see these. But
mhm,
but this was an answer to your question. I thought, whoa, is a human shared humanity that we're talking about here. they're even telling me, from all parts of the universe, of the world. I didn't go to Antarctica, I have to admit. No,
Yet, yet.
no, not yet. I'm sure those creatures up there in the animal world want dignity too, but um,
Wow.
oh no. So, Kate, the point is that when you get to the core of what it means to have your dignity assaulted or honored, either way, because of the flip side of the same coin,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, people understand this. They understand it, and remember, I told you earlier that these 10 elements of dignity that I share with people when I introduce the dignity model, they say to me, "Oh, that's just common sense. These 10 elements of dignity." And I say, "Yeah, they're common sense, but they're not common practice. We have to learn this." And so people from all over really share this desire to be treated this way. And I mean, who would have imagined that 10 elements of dignity, 10. I
Mhm.
mean, that number sound familiar? So yeah, and it works. It just works when people have, especially with the acknowledgement. Oh, that was the other one I missed, the acknowledgement. People need acknowledgement for the suffering they've endured. It just feels magical to know that no matter where you go in the world, human beings are going to react in the same way to this.
Donna,
Hmm.
I would love, I mean, that sounds, it makes sense, as you said, people say, but look, we are in such a divisive place. And sometimes, and maybe this is revealing my own vulnerabilities, but sometimes it's just hard. Like sometimes it's hard when you feel so differently,
Yeah.
and you're in such conflict. How can you just talk about that for a minute? Like, have you been in that place where it's just hard to even conjure up kind of the ability to find that place of acknowledgement
Recognition.
and
Yeah.
that recognition, and how can we practice getting over that hump when it's really challenging?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely we're in that place right now for sure. Nobody would argue that. And I I remember when I was working with Archbishop Tutu up in Northern Ireland, and we were convening dialogues between the Northern Irish and I mean the Catholics in Southern Ireland and the Protestants in Northern Ireland. And there was one guy who was in the what do you call it? Like the special armies. What do you call it?
That wasn't that the IRA, the Irish
No, no,
Republican?
I'm talking about well, anyway, there was somebody who was working for the Protestant side who his
Mm.
favorite way of killing IRA people, the other side, was to take a big uh, kind of cinder block and smash the heads of the people. And
Ah.
when I knew this guy was going to be there, I said to the Archbishop, I'm just worried that I'm not going to see this guy's dignity. This is just appalling to me. I mean, and he said, yeah, yeah, I can understand that. And he said, well, Donna, if you can't see the dignity in that person, I think you just have to keep digging.
Hmm.
He
Wow.
said, just keep on digging. But even a more powerful story than that was when I listened to a podcast with John Lewis was on this podcast. The
Mm.
Representative Lewis, the black
Hmm.
guy from,
Hmm.
where was he from?
South
South
Carolina?
Carolina, I think. Yeah.
Caroline.
And he was being interviewed by this woman, and she said to him, "I know your whole civil rights tradition is based on Martin Luther King and having um, love be your guiding force, nonviolent force." And John Lewis said, "Yes, I have to this day stayed with that aspiration to see the love in everybody and to treat everybody that way." And she said, "But before our podcast here, I went online and I looked at the experience you had when you were in Selma crossing over the bridge, to get to the other side and with as demonstrators." And she said, "I saw this guy hit you in the head and with a fierce anger and a fierce, like rejection of your dignity. And he said, well, yeah, of course, he said, of course, that was horrible for me. And the only way I could try to stay in a loving framework was to ask myself the question, first of all, see him as a little boy. See
Mm.
that angry man who hit him over the head. See him as a little child. And I asked myself, what happened to him? What happened? We are not born angry. We are not born to hate. He said, and what happened to him? He probably had a loveless life. Who knows what kind of violence he experienced? Maybe he had parents who, were physically and emotionally violent with him. And so I thought, ooh, yeah, think of them as
Mm.
kids. Honestly, it really helps. You should try it because um, and the other thing is, I think, there's an aspirational dimension to this too, Stephanie. I think, when I have good days with this, at night I'll think about what happened in my interactions with people, and if I didn't screw up and end up, snapping at somebody, or even my husband, my sweet husband, he always says, "Don't forget to tell people you're a recovering dignity violator."
I
And
love
so,
that.
but we have good days and bad days. Let's face it. We're not going to see everybody. This is why I say this is aspirational. And to the best of my ability, I do try every day to live this and to use your word, Kate, to practice this. This is really, in fact, I think for me, I mean, I believe that this work is spiritual practice, that this
Mm.
work comes from a higher power, and whatever you call that, I don't call it God, call it higher power, call it whatever you want, because that's another unifying aspect. If you believe that, um, this is work that is meant to enhance our shared humanity and
Mhm.
enhance and advance our consciousness, then
Mm.
that's really good. That's good. I've had a good day. But boy, there's sometimes you get me on the phone with a customer service agent who
Oh,
tells me what I want,
oh.
No, I don't want that seat on the airplane. Get me up closer.
Oh, you made me
So,
feel so.
I
I
mean,
hear you.
we're gonna mess up. I mean, it's true. It's just, how do we circle back? How do we get to that place? And a neuroscientist taught me about, and not only a neuroscientist, but this wonderful Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron. Maybe some of you have read her work, but it's like, how do you get back to your present moment, and how do you get back to that sense of generosity, that sense of compassion, and it's meditation. You take 10 minutes to get yourself back centered on that goal, that shared goal, to interact with people in a way that does see their dignity, and in a way that you feel your dignity is um, being honored and recognized as well.
Love that. This feels like the moment to really ask you the question that we ask everyone. Unless Kate, is there anything else that you have?
No, I
I
think
mean,
that's
there's so
right.
much more, but we are really you've been generous with your time. So we typically close these conversations, and this has been such a joy, um, with what is your Meraki?
Mm.
Donna, what is it that, and I think you've touched on some of this, but what is it that brings you meaning and fulfillment that you immerse yourself in with creativity and soul and love?
Well, it started out with the question you asked, or the question that I addressed in the beginning, and that is about my early life, and how I realized there was so much suffering in our world, in our family, and that I was really going to figure out how to do something about it. I remember as a young kid, I'm gonna understand this. And I grew up in the
Mm.
sticks. I grew up in a town of 2,500 people. So it's not like I had, exposure to international conflict resolution or any of, but I had a lot of exposure to conflict. So I just kept following that desire to deeply understand, what are we doing as human beings? Why are we doing this? What is it about us that gets us into these terrible, terrible traps all the time? I mean, what about love? What about connection? And in the early days, I thought that I was, interested in conflict because I lived it, I knew it, I breathed it. But once I started studying this and I started working, I came to Harvard to work with this wonderful man, this social psychologist, Herbert Kellman. And once it kind of solidified the fact that, okay, I'm seeing this hatefulness, this terrible destruction, these dignity violations all over the world. And then once I realized I could figure out how to address this suffering and how to help people claim their dignity and elevate themselves with that belief that we are all born with dignity, I just thought, oh my gosh, I think I've been misleading myself all these years because it's not really conflict I'm interested in. It's love. How can we
Mm.
to connect in this way? And the fastest way to connect is to honor each other's dignity. It's just like it works every time. And so my goal here, I think now, especially later in my life, is to figure out how we can get better at loving. How do we get better at loving? And I'll tell you, dignity is at the core of it.
Well,
Understanding this deep, deep
if
human.
that's the title of your next book,
Yes.
That's
sign
wonderful.
us up, but we're ready to read
We're
it.
ready.
All right. Yes.
Oh,
All
boy.
right. Well, if you're ready to write it with me,
Oh.
that would even be better.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I mean, that is a noble, and we're grateful for your Meraki because that is something that the world needs. So thank you, Donna. Thank you for your
Yes.
time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kate. And
Thank you.
thanks.
Well, thank you for
Wonderful.
giving me this platform. You can see I'm a woman with a mission here.
We are happy to be part of the
And
cult.
Hmm.
Stephanie. Look, we've got to get Kate one. We've got
The
to get one for
dignity
Kate.
bracelet.
So
Yes,
this
we'll
is the
have
Yeah.
Dignity Sisterhood bracelet. And
Wonderful.
yeah, you're getting one, Kate. You're
you
getting
just
one.
earned
Better,
yours.
better than Tiffany's.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, thank you. All right, I'm
All
gonna
right.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so,
stop
so
the
much for this
recording.
opportunity.
That is great.